What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. It is Thursday, February 20th, 2025, and I have some breaking news to share with you guys. Right now it is 15:54 Eastern Time here in the United States, and we have some major breaking news coming in from Eastern Europe. So we're now hearing some more sources confirming that Europe is planning to deploy military forces into Ukraine. This time, the Telegraph is reporting that Britain and France are developing a plan that would deploy Western armed forces in Ukrainian cities and strategic facilities, and they had sources from inside of the European capitals. So this is absolutely huge news. And the plan allegedly includes France sending 10,000 troops, which would include forces being stationed in key cities, ports, and infrastructure hubs, monitoring borders via satellites, drones, and recon aircraft, protecting airspace and restoring commercial flights, and keeping NATO reinforcements in Poland and Romania for rapid deployment. So this is absolutely huge news, guys. Europe is seriously considering sending up to 30,000 troops into Ukraine, not to the front lines, but they would hang back in the cities and in strategic locations to prevent the cities and strategic areas from falling under the control of the Russian military. And this would be regardless of whether there's any kind of a ceasefire. They're talking about sending these troops regardless, okay? And the Kremlin responded today to the reports that Britain and France are planning to deploy 30,000 European troops to Ukraine, and they just said that it's a concern. And Romania approved a law yesterday allowing the shooting down of Russian drones and missiles in Romanian airspace. The bill expands airspace control, permitting the interception of unauthorized drones and missiles even during peacetime. NATO forces may also assist under collective defense treaties. So this is huge news, okay? We know that several Russian drones crashed in Romania already since the start of the war in Ukraine. Potentially some have already been shot down, but now Romania has approved a law allowing their military and security forces to shoot down Russian drones and missiles even during peacetime. And last night there was a massive drone attack on Ukraine while the U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, was in Ukraine, and we were covering it live. And for some reason yesterday, U.S. nuclear forces were on very high alert. There were over 43 emergency action messages yesterday. Emergency action messages are nuclear codes that are transmitted by U.S. Strategic Command to U.S. nuclear forces. And we know now that Ukraine shot down 158 drones, including 80 that were shot down by air defense and 78 that were suppressed by electronic warfare. Okay, so all of this happening 24 hours after the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Saudi Arabia. There was this big meeting between Russian and American diplomats in Saudi Arabia, and then literally 24 hours later, Russia launches a massive drone attack on Ukraine while Keith Kellogg is visiting Ukraine. Okay, so clearly Russia is not afraid of the U.S. This is very, very concerning. And the office of Ukraine's president said that a joint press conference in Kiev with the U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg was canceled today at the request of the U.S. I'm sure this probably has something to do with the recent back and forth between Trump and Zelensky. And the Trump administration has given Ukraine an improved draft for a minerals for weapons agreement after Zelensky infuriated Trump by rejecting his initial offer. This is being reported by a Ukrainian official. And yesterday, Reuters reported, citing two sources, that the Trump administration is seeking to strike a simplified minerals deal with Ukraine to get a pact in place quickly and later negotiate detailed terms, such as how much of Ukraine's resources the U.S. would own. This could potentially work in Ukraine's favor because the original agreement had Ukraine sign over control of their oil and gas infrastructure, their pipelines and such. And that could potentially work in Ukraine's favor because if Russia knows that Ukraine's energy is under the control of the U.S., then Russia's not going to strike their energy infrastructure anymore, because then that would be striking American pipelines, American oil refineries, American gas pumping stations. So this could potentially help protect Ukraine by having the U.S. come into Ukraine and take control of part of their energy infrastructure and part of their mineral resources. It would basically stop Russia from attacking some of these areas, especially if there's American businesses there and American companies, okay? So that could potentially work in Ukraine's favor. And earlier this afternoon, we had a presidential doomsday plane that was scrambled out of Offutt Air Base. This is very interesting. It took off to the northwest, did a loop, and then came back down and landed. So basically, it was only up in the air for like an hour. So either this was some kind of a test or exercise, or something spooked them and they got scrambled up into the air. Okay, but yesterday, our nuclear forces were on very high alert, and why, I have no idea. And we also have a U.S. B-52 nuclear bomber airborne over Louisiana this afternoon. It took off from Shreveport. We also have several sub-hunters off of Florida, off the Florida Atlantic coast here, patrolling for Russian or Chinese subs. And last night, there was another Russian group of bombers that went to the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone. So right after the meetings with Russia, these Russian bombers appear right outside of Alaska, okay? 2 days in a row, February 18th and February 19th, okay? So clearly Trump is not scaring Putin, and they're sending bombers to our airspace. They're attacking Ukraine while our special representative is there, okay? So Putin is really showing a lot of disrespect to Trump. And Russians are reporting that Ukraine is preparing a massive counteroffensive into the Bryansk region of Russia. Several Ukrainian brigades are staging around the Trabortine border checkpoint, including the 158th, 32nd, and 162nd brigades. The Russian sources say Ukraine will involve at least 10 brigades, so the Ukrainians are trying to expand into another oblast in Russia next to the Kursk region. They're staging up to 10 brigades, okay? And the Red Cross received the bodies of dead Israeli hostages this morning, and that included 5- and 2-year-old toddlers. Very, very sad news. And Trump reportedly wants a huge trade deal with China that would include a nuclear weapons security agreement. So Trump has talked about denuclearizing and going back to arms control treaties, which is something that Democrats are really fond of. That's what Obama did. And Obama signed the catastrophic START II treaty in 2012 with Putin. And the START II treaty gutted our nuclear arsenal. We removed over 1,500 nuclear warheads that were deployed on missiles, okay? And now we have Russia and China, who together have more nuclear weapons than we have. Okay, so now is not the time to talk about arms control, because Russia and China never abide by arms control. Now's the time for the U.S. to arm up like crazy. Okay. And Trump said today that the war in Ukraine should be resolved within a year. Otherwise, there would be World War III. And the Belarusian Ministry of Defense told Poland that they're ready to conduct mutual inspections with Poland to a depth of 80 kilometers from their borders. So Belarus obviously wants to see what kind of fortifications Poland is building. Poland is building this massive defense line worth billions of dollars, and Belarus wants to see what that is. Okay, so they're offering Poland mutual inspections. Obviously, Poland is not going to go for that. Okay, and last night, during all the craziness with the drone attacks on Ukraine and all the EAMs, we had 2 more nuclear bombers go down to the Middle East. Sunday night, they conducted a live fire exercise, and we were listening to that live. We could hear them arming the weapons. One of the bomber pilots with the call sign Grim 11 said on the radio, weapons status red, and we were covering that live. We could hear that live on my radio here, and looks like the U.S. did another live fire exercise or some kind of show of force last night. So this is an official tweet from U.S. Central Command. They say here, CENTCOM conducts second bomber task force mission in 2 days. For the second time within 48 hours, U.S. Central Command conducted another bomber task force mission in the Middle East on February 20th, demonstrating force projection capabilities and partner nation integration in the region. 2 B-52s from RAF Fairford flew across Europe and 6 partner countries in CENTCOM's areas of responsibility during their mission, which included aerial refueling and training missions at ranges. Additionally, 1 partner nation provided fighter escorts for the bombers throughout the mission. So this is definitely a show of force to Iran, and they're also actually doing real training. So when it comes to striking Iran, they've already worked through everything. Okay, they've done the motions, they've done dry runs. These are dry runs for attacks on Iran. Okay, the Trump administration and Netanyahu will strike Iran this year. Okay, there's already been numerous credible intelligence reports from the Biden administration and the Trump administration suggesting that Israel is planning to strike Iran's nuclear facilities this year. And this evening, we have Ukraine under an air raid alert. Again, most of Ukraine under an air raid alert. We are approaching the 3-year anniversary of the war. I'm very concerned that Russia's going to do something crazy. Now, what's interesting is last night, Russia launched multiple Tu-95 bombers. These are the bombers that they typically use to strike Ukraine. And they flew all the way to the Caspian Sea, but they never released any missiles. And this is the 4th time that Russia has done these fake attacks where they scramble their bombers to make it look like they're getting ready for a big strike, and then they don't launch their missiles. They go all the way to the Caspian Sea and then turn around and come back. And the only thing I can think of is that they are testing Ukraine's air defenses, because every time those bombers go up into the air, Ukraine turns on all their radars and turns on their air defenses, and then Russia can see with their electronic warfare tools where the radars are, and they can figure out where the weak spots are, okay? Because in recent months, a lot of Russia's missiles have been getting shot down by Ukraine, okay? And the U.S. is reportedly considering reducing its military presence in Europe due to priorities in the Asia-Pacific region and the border with Mexico. According to NBC, the U.S. Defense Secretary told this to Zelensky when they went to the Munich Security Conference last week, and apparently the Ukrainian delegation was stunned by the statement. And Trump said last night that Russia has the cards in peace negotiations because they have taken a lot of territory. And according to the Washington Post, okay, so keep this in mind, the Washington Post is reporting that U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth signed a memo ordering senior leaders at the Pentagon across the U.S. military to develop plans to cut 40% of the defense budget by 2030 in increments of 8% per year for the next 5 years. Wow. So this is absolutely insane. A 40% cut in our defense budget by 2030. That sounds really drastic. And it kind of reminds me of what Obama did. If you remember, back when Obama was president, they had the 50% cut to our military. That was just like straight across the board. Now, for some reason, the Trump administration wants to cut 40% of our military down. Very, very concerning, considering that Russia and China are rapidly expanding their military budgets and their militaries. And the French President Emmanuel Macron and the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will visit Washington, D.C. next week to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. Okay, so that's huge news. We also have some huge news coming out of Israel this afternoon. Numerous explosive devices were found across Tel Aviv in buses, okay, city buses, 3 of which were detonated and 2 were disarmed. Apparently, these explosive devices were believed to have originated from the West Bank. Okay, and apparently now the Israeli Minister of Traffic has halted all public transportation across the country. So keep Israel in your prayers. And the Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum confirmed on Wednesday that the U.S. has been using surveillance drones to monitor cartels in Mexico. So they're flying surveillance drones in Mexican airspace, and she said that this was at her request. Okay, so she actually requested this, supposedly. Okay, so the U.S. is now officially flying surveillance drones over Mexican airspace. Okay, you know what the next step is? The next step is dropping bombs from those surveillance drones. And Russia is currently working on organizing a coup against the president of Ukraine. It will involve Ukrainian officials who agree to capitulate to Russia in exchange for high power positions in the hypothetical puppet government of Ukraine. And Trump said yesterday that Greenland is needed from a point of security. And yesterday, U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says the era of endless war of attrition is over, and Ukraine must see opportunities in granting access to its resources. He added that U.S. taxpayers deserve reimbursement. Indeed, we hear escalation rhetoric and resistance, which President Trump won't tolerate. And the Polish foreign minister is flying to the U.S. next week for an urgent meeting with the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Likely, this is related to the rumors that the U.S. is going to consider removing their troops from all Eastern European countries that joined NATO after the fall of the USSR, which is what Russia is demanding or has demanded in the past. Okay, before the war started, if you remember, Russia demanded that NATO remove all their forces from all of Eastern Europe, all the countries that were part of the Warsaw Pact. They don't want NATO forces there, and apparently now there's rumors floating around that the U.S. may consider removing their troops from places like Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, the Baltic countries. Okay, all these countries would have American troops removed, which would be a big deal. So the Polish foreign minister is flying to the U.S. next week. And Zelensky spoke with the leaders of France and the UK yesterday, once again after France held another emergency meeting with the rest of Europe. They held their emergency meeting on Monday with the largest European powers, and then on Wednesday they held another emergency meeting with smaller European powers. So Europe is panicking. They obviously have some intelligence that Russia's potentially going to attack the Baltics or Poland or other parts of Europe. So they're scrambling now, and they're trying to figure out how to continue to fund Ukraine to fight against Russia. And Macron said yesterday, "We support Ukraine and will take full responsibility for ensuring peace and security in Europe. This is a fundamental interest of France, and I am its guarantor." Now, if you guys are not aware, France is the only country in Europe that has its own nuclear program. Okay, Britain is a nuclear armed country, but they get their missiles from the US. They use Trident missiles, but France has their own nuclear triad domestically developed since the 1950s. So France, as the sole independent nuclear power in Europe, is taking the lead on this. And the Moscow Institute of Computer Science is reportedly on fire. This is an institute that was sanctioned by the West for working in the Russian sector of information technology and having a license issued by the FSB, Center for Licensing, Certification, and Protection of State Secrets. Okay, so this is some kind of a FSB licensed IT institute in Moscow is now on fire, probably the work of Ukrainian sleeper agents. And Kazakhstan is seeking discussions with Ukraine after an attack by its drones on Russian territory affected flows through its important crude export conduit. This is being reported by Bloomberg. An oil pumping station on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium link, which ships about 80% of Kazakh oil exports, was halted after a drone attack on Monday, possibly reducing flows by 30% during about 2 months of repairs. And the head of the Romanian presidential chancellery, Cristian Diascanescu, declared that in the U.S.-Russia negotiations in Riyadh, the Russian delegation demanded a new division of spheres of influence and the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Eastern Europe, including from Romania. And apparently, according to Diaconescu, the United States refused so far, okay? But the Russians demanded that the U.S. remove forces from Eastern Europe, but the U.S. refused. And U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is considering firing or removing generals and senior officers in the Department of Defense as early as this week. And South Korea and the U.S. staged joint air drills involving a B-1 bomber. That's a strategic bomber. And when the U.S. and Russian diplomats met in Saudi Arabia, the Russian delegation presented the U.S. delegation with a printout claiming that U.S. companies lost hundreds of billions of dollars by exiting Russia. And Russia plans to produce 750 Iskander missiles and 560 KH-101 cruise missiles this year. So Russia's ramping up their missile production, which means they're going to strike Ukraine even harder this year. And the IRS is about to lay off 7,000 employees today. And Trump said yesterday that he's about to announce tariffs on cars, semiconductors, chips, pharmaceuticals, and probably lumber over the next month or sooner. He also said that America is committed to becoming the crypto capital of the world. And Trump is going to sign an executive order designed to terminate any and all federal taxpayer benefits going to illegal aliens. And Trump said yesterday on Air Force One that he plans to inspect the gold reserves at Fort Knox. And also 3 oil tankers were damaged by kabooms in separate incidents in the Mediterranean Sea in the past month. And this was last night. You can see here there was an AWACS plane in Alaska. This was probably related to the Russian bombers that flew up to the Alaskan ADIZ. We also had a nuclear war command and control plane last night. We had a high priority strategic recon plane keeping an eye on northern Canada. And then we had multiple refuelers off the coast of Cape Cod. And then here you can see the flight path of the 2 B-52s that went on a mission into the Middle East again. They turned their transponders off after getting refueled just south of Greece. They were accompanied by 3 aerial refuelers. So like I said, dry runs for an attack on Iran. We also had a U.S. aerial refueler fly up to the Yellow Sea for some reason last night. And then we had a South Korean recon plane patrolling the DMZ. Last night we had more reconnaissance in Poland and the Baltics. Here we have this private chartered U.S. military recon plane that was flying through the Suwalki Gap and patrolling the border of Poland and Russia. There was also a Swedish recon plane patrolling the border of the Baltics and Russia. And then we had a U.S. recon plane flying through the Taiwan Strait and just south of Taiwan. But that's the latest breaking news that I have. I might be back later on tonight with another update, and I may go live. It does appear that these air raid alerts are expanding in Ukraine, so potentially there could be some kind of big strike tonight on Ukraine. And if there is, I will be live, and I'll be covering it live. Make sure you download my app. It's free in the Google Play Store. We are working on a Apple version. There's no Apple version right now, but you can get it for free from Google Play for your Android device, and it allows me to send out notifications to you when there's breaking news, when I go live, when I post videos, so you'll never miss updates. Also, you can follow me on Telegram and Twitter or X. I post all my updates to Telegram and X as well. But until the next time, take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.